Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. A huge day in the championship as Oscar Piastri steals pole position from Lando Norris's grasp. Fastest all weekend. FP1, FP2, FP3 was Lando Norris, but when it really mattered in the final part of qualifying, yet again Piastri pips him by an absolute hair. Norris gives his perspective on the matter, but not the most dramatic thing of the day in many respects. Toto Wolff making it absolutely clear what is happening right now behind the scenes at Mercedes, making a remarkable statement the way of Max Verstappen, saying that absolutely it is the plan to get Max for cheap next season compared to what he might have had to pay for him this time around. In that scenario, who would go from the Mercedes team? Certainly George Russell nor Kimi Antonelli can be very happy today. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. We will come back to this Toto Wolff stuff towards the end of the video. I'll just do a quick roundup of the news elsewhere. This is one thing from Flavio Briatore, who has made it clear that he's not very impressed with the way that Franco Colapinto is presently driving. Now, he says his results aren't what I expected and has casted doubt over the future. It wouldn't be a massive surprise to see Colapinto go at the end of this season. There were even rumours it might have happened even before the summer break. It now looks like he's going to be set to the end of the year, but again today was pretty anonymous from Alpine in general, who are currently, as we know, right at the bottom end of the championship, literally. P10 as it stands. Next year, maybe not, because Cadillac are coming in, they're not expected to be great, and they're, of course, getting Sergio Perez. We thought Perez could be an option to replace Colapinto at Alpine. Now that looks less likely. We'll see whether it's even a spot that Yuki Tsunoda can end up, because we thought that Bottas and Perez were options for Alpine's second drive. Now none of those are options because they're going to Cadillac, but it doesn't seem like Briatore really wants to keep Colapinto around for too much longer. Let's get into practice. Norris put in a stonking lap in practice today, a 108.9. Now, the all-time lap record around Zandvoort was a 108.8 by Max when he set that pole time back in 2021. Norris got within a tenth of it in practice. Purple, purple, purple. And I know there are people looking at this McLaren and saying, are we sure this thing is for real, right? Like, is this car actually legal? Look, as far as we know, yes, it just seems incredibly composed, especially around circuits like this. But also, McLaren tend to push very hard in final practice. They tend to get closer to the limit in terms of engine mode and these other things. At least it seems that way than other teams do. There's some theories as to why, whether it's somehow to do with their rear brakes and whether they want to really stress them during practice to make sure everything's in a good spot. But we just tend to find that McLaren's gap in practice is often bigger than it is when it actually comes to qualifying in the race. There's probably something in that. But not to say that the gap isn't there, because it very much so is. And Max put in a lap a couple of minutes later that was a seconds off where Lando was, which just goes to show where, you know, the Red Bull was at that point compared to the McLaren. Piastri put in a lap that ended up being 2.5 tenths down, but it really felt like Norris was the man to beat to this point, which he definitely was, right? He was gaining time in all three sectors, right? Piastri was green, green, green. Norris on this lap was purple, purple, purple. We see that Russell was already 7 tenths down at this point after just the middle sector. Such was that lap from Norris in the final practice session. This was Antonelli on a solid lap, and then he encounters Tsunoda on his right, and then Stroll right here. It was a bit confusing. So Tsunoda, I don't really know what he was doing, but he pulled to the right-hand side. Stroll got blocked, got annoyed by that, so he then slowed down. But actually, then it was Stroll who was dawdling on the racing line. So Antonelli had to slam on the brakes, couldn't complete his fast lap. Bit of a disaster class today for Stroll, and really for Aston Martin in general. They were certainly hoping for better after a very promising Friday. This was Alonso nearly going into the wall. Russell actually got very harshly, well, not harshly penalised, but I think what I want to say is yesterday's incident, Russell versus Piastri, was very controversial, very dramatic. We talked about it yesterday. Had Piastri clipped Russell as it was very close to happening, there could have been casualties in the pit lane, right? There could have been injuries in the pit lane because McLaren told Piastri to go around. He didn't check his mirrors, maybe he didn't have time to, whatever you want to say. Russell nearly goes into the back of him. Could have been a major incident. That was in the pit lane. Piastri totally got away with it, as expected for practice, and the team was given a $5,000 fine. In this instance, Russell did not get away with this. He was actually given a warning. So no penalty, but he was giving an official warning for this incident. And yeah, Alonso was coming into the pit lane. I don't really think it was expected because he was on a hot lap. So I think that Russell was probably expecting or was getting the comms maybe that, okay, Alonso's on a fast lap behind. He was probably expecting Alonso to finish the lap, but he didn't. He went to dive into the pits. Russell nearly pushed him into the wall, then had a second stab at it and got out the way. Could have been pretty bad. Wasn't a great incident by any means, but it was a warning, an official warning for Russell, which is, relatively rare for, not rare exactly, but like it's practice, right? The fact that Piastri didn't get a warning and his team got fined €5,000, whereas today Ben Sulayem decided that he wanted a new suit. So he was going to get out. Obviously he doesn't make the calls, but you know what I mean? €7,500 was this fine and an official warning. So there was some debate about that, and as a result, everyone gets away with it. We go into qualifying with a fresh start. Norris, Piastri, Russell, Sainz, Max, Leclerc. Those were the only drivers within a second of the P1 time after practice. Hamilton didn't have a great time in the final practice, so he decided to go back to Leclerc's spec. He tried the Monaco wing, just max the downforce out and see if it has better control of the rear of the car. Didn't really, so he went back to what they were using going into qualifying, and it seemed to work better. I mean, this weekend, basically every single lap that Leclerc and Hamilton did were within half a tenth of one another. That is where the SF25 currently is, and frankly, it's nowhere near good enough. So Hamilton got rid of that Monaco wing, put back the slightly more unloaded version for qualifying, same setup as Leclerc, and let's get into it. Behrman had his moment in P1 for a couple of seconds before he was then taken away. I think it was by Hamilton at the time. Unfortunately for the Hasses, just wasn't their day around this circuit. It is so competitive around Zandvoort for most of the cars. For some of the cars, they were in a bit of a league of their own, but for most of the cars, the gaps today were very competitive indeed, and yeah, it didn't work out today for Haas. So it was, the laps were flying in at the start, 10-2, and then we got this moment. So Lance Stroll, he's done it again. Yesterday, he crashed, as we know, and it was a pretty big moment into the heavily banked left-hander. Stroll then crashes again, and it's not like he just clipped the grass. Like, he was well and truly in the grass. And you don't see this very often. We saw it happen to, was it Lando in Hungary, coming into that final corner, he put a wheel in the grass. Sometimes if you just put a wheel on the white line, if it's rained a little bit, that can be enough to spin you round. Colapinto did it, I mean, or was it maybe Sargent at this track when he crashed? Yeah, it was out of that left-hander again. He crashed by putting a wheel into the grass. You know, it can happen, but it's pretty rare that it happens here. The track is so wide here that most drivers don't really make this error, especially not having so much of it, right? Like, okay, maybe if you touch the grass a little bit, it's like, oh, that was a bit scary. That Stroll had both of his wheels fully in the grass here, like he was always going around. Credit to Aston Martin, by the way, for delivering a tank, because that car is very hard to break. It did break, but he hit the wall hard, the front wing broke, but the suspension seemed okay, he could drive it back to the pits, but he'd also hit the rear, and it ended up being too much of a job for them to fix it. So an absolute disaster class from Stroll, really. I mean, especially to crash in Q1 as well. Like, come on, get a lap on the board, right? At least give yourself a chance. So Stroll manages to take an Aston Martin, which was actually looking pretty competitive this weekend, and unfortunately put it in the bin on both occasions. I don't imagine his team is going to be too happy about him for that. But look, who knows if it rains tomorrow, which is, I think, looking a little less likely now. But if it does, then Stroll masterclass incoming. Let's run it up. So Q1 concludes. Norris, Piastri, again, Norris was 10th and a half in the ascendancy at this point. Piastri put in this lap, and Verstappen was only about 3/10 off, and Max gave it a really good go today, to be fair, given the circumstances, what he got out of that Red Bull. It seemed like they got the car in a bit of a better position, at least gave him the possibility to fight. But the end of Q1 was, as expected, very dramatic. Yuki did a lap that was just good enough to get into Q2. He put it up to P12. Both of the Hasses are out. Stroll was out. Hülkenberg was out again, by the way. It's got to be said. Look, Bortoletto's doing a great job, but Hülkenberg's recent quali record is quite frankly atrocious. You know, with regardless of the incredible podium in Silverstone, obviously, the rest of Hulkenberg's season has been pretty bad, certainly in qualifying, but I guess that depends on how highly you rate Bortoleto. Colapinto was out as well in P16. Lawson did a great lap. I mean, look at that, right? Lawson was 5th, and less than 2/10 back was Hadjar in 13th. That's how tight the margins were here, and both of the Ferraris initially were not looking very good, but they did manage to make it through. Verstappen then put in a 109.1, which was very good at the time. He then wasn't very happy about this moment with, that is Lando Norris on the left-hand side there through the corner that he may be called the Verstappen corner in due course. And again, Max did a great job maximising today. Lando probably didn't really have anywhere else to go. Max wasn't very happy about it, but it seems like both drivers are going to get away with it in the end. So Norris then puts in a 108.8, and this was like, wow, this is a serious benchmark because that was quicker than the lap record of all time. Piastri's lap was only a 10th, beyond that. So every lap this weekend, Lando stuck it on P1, and Piastri was somewhere between a 10th and 2.5 tenths behind. That was the story of the whole weekend, but it was to change, as has happened before, in the final part of qualifying. Alonso put in a lap that was P7. Antonelli actually looked better today. He was only a couple of tenths off Russell and looked pretty strong at a time, but that lap was not good enough in the end, and the W15 ended up being out in Q2, which was, again, tough for Antonelli, but that car just didn't seem to have all that much in it this weekend so far. Alonso did a good lap. Both of the Racing Bulls got through, and that meant Yuki Tsunoda was out. This time, he didn't get the right lap in, really, as the final attempt. He was exactly half a second off Max and around a relatively short circuit. That's not going to put you in a great spot. He would have needed quite a chunk more time to actually get through. He would have needed another 10.5, at least another 10.5 to make it through, which might have been a bit of a challenge. And I just do wonder how good that Racing Bulls really is. Now, Albon was not a happy man either with the way that the team had approached their tyre preparation, which is not the first time this has happened, but Sainz did make it through. Understandably, given Yuki this weekend was talking, okay, I've got the upgrades on now, now it's time for me to show what I can do type thing. It's not been great, has it, right? It's not been great. Ended up P12 regardless. He really needs points, and he needs points fast if he is going to keep his dreams alive of staying at Red Bull next year or even staying on the grid. Then we get the final runs. Qualifying gets underway for the third part of qualifying. And there's loads of nuance here. Wins is a factor, certainly around this circuit. You get a gust of wind at some corner, that's going to cost you half a tenth, maybe more than that. The margins were unbelievably fine. I think Piastri deserves a lot of credit, first of all, and it's sessions like this that show why, even though Norris has made a nice comeback in the championship over the last few rounds, Piastri is still, in basically everyone's eyes, the favourite for the championship. Because I don't know if this was the other way around and Piastri had been faster all weekends, if Norris would have been able to find that little bit extra to snatch it away from when it mattered in the end. But Piastri puts in a phenomenal Sector 1. It was Norris was killing it in Sector 1 all weekend. 23.5s, 23.4s. Piastri then goes at 23.3 and puts in a lap that nobody was able to top. Norris had a better second sector, but Piastri was slightly quicker in the final sector. The margin was a hundredth of a second. It was 0.012. Like, it was insanely tight, the gap between the pair of them. But Piastri found the time, and that's critical, right? Norris is fast all weekends. When it mattered, Piastri looked at the timesheets, figured out where he could maybe extract a bit more performance, and he went and did it. And it's not like Lando's first lap was bad. I mean, a 108.6 was also a massive lap record, but Piastri just found a little extra. And then critically, in the final laps, we saw a similar thing unfold. Actually, Norris this time was faster than Piastri by 4 thousandths of a second. So it's unimaginable how fine these margins were today. The first time out, Piastri was quicker by 12 thousandths. The second time out, Norris was quicker by 4 thousandths. But on the second run, the conditions just seemingly weren't quite as good. Not many drivers were able to improve really on their second attempt. At least of the drivers that still had 2 sets of new tyres to go for, the conditions seemingly a little bit trickier, and Norris was about 7 or so hundredths down in the first sector alone, and had he nailed the first sector better on his final run, maybe that would have been enough to pit Piastri. But yeah, what a great lap from Oscar. Great lap from Lando as well, but it's big around here, right? It's really big around here. Around Zandvoort, not easy to overtake, having that lead off the line. Look, Norris had it last year, lost the lead to Max into turn 1, then got it back. But Norris was confident he would get it back because he was in a faster car. But against your own teammates, that becomes far more of a challenge. So, big day in the championship, no doubt about that. Piastri from Lando, Max puts it third. The real standout, though, was Isaac Hadjar putting it into P4. Lawson was about 3/10 back down in P8. Unbelievable lap from Hadjar. I will say as well, just while I remember, in Q2, a lot of the drivers went out very early. Antonelli went out really early, and I think that probably cost them in the end. So it did seem there was a slight advantage to be had today by doing your lap right towards the end. I think Verstappen gained a little bit from that, and to be within 2.5 tenths of that McLaren rocket ship is particularly impressive. Leclerc ended up in 6th, just behind George Russell. Hamilton was about 0.5 tenth off his teammates, but, you know, they were kind of in no man's land, really, Ferrari. Not good enough to go further up, but, you know, not absolutely tragic. Sainz, Alonso rounding out the top 10. Those are your starters for tomorrow. Of course, Lance Stroll will begin right at the back of the grid. George wasn't very happy about it, couldn't find the right window with the tyres, he says. And Lando, in his interview afterwards, did say that there is a luck factor because of the wins. And, like, again, I do find the contrast there, because Lando was asked, are you disappointed not getting pole? If it was Oscar getting asked that question, he'd be like, yeah, I'm gutted. I can't believe it. Missed out by a thousandth of a second, hundreds of a second. You know, I wish I could have found a bit more time. Kind of frustrated. Lando was like, well, it's fine. And because the winds is changing all the time and you get gust in different directions, there is an element of luck. It's not like he's wrong. He's probably right. I mean, if he got a slightly heavier gust of wind into turn 1, or coming out of the final corner or something than Piastri did, then that could be the difference maker between pole and not pole, as we know. But also, probably Lando could deep dive into the lap and say, well, I made a bit of a mistake there, could have maybe found a bit more time. I don't imagine Piastri, had he lost out, would have been saying, oh, well, it was just bad luck because of the wins. And who knows, mate, like, who knows who got lucky and who got unlucky because of the wins? We don't have the data, we don't know, and Lando certainly wouldn't have known, having got out of the car, whether he was lucky or unlucky about the situation. So that's just a bit of an aside. Leclerc says he's very disappointed, didn't put the job together, I was surprised by what the car was doing, not an excuse. The reality is the car right now just is not good enough. So fair play to Max putting it into third. Russell was down in 5th in the end. And this is what I wanted to get into before we close out between Toto Wolff and Max, because Max made this comment yesterday, there's no secret, I went for lunch with Toto and the family. I mean, it's absolutely allowed. Now, we know that Toto wants to get Max on his team. This should be no surprise. The question is, under what conditions would he want to do that? And why didn't it happen this time when it potentially could have done? Max says, oh, I wanted to stay at Red Bull. Red Bull say, oh, Max was always going to stay and all of that. But Toto said something absolutely remarkable, I thought, to the Dutch media yesterday. And I always couldn't believe that he said this, but here's the official quotation from the article, and it says the following: Verstappen can also now wait to see who will do best next year and then make a decision if necessary. Hopefully, says Toto, we will be that team, the one with the best credentials, and then I will only have to pay 10% of what I might have paid this year. And that's exactly what I said to his manager, Raymond Vermeulen. You're cheap Austrian, he said, and I replied, and you are a greedy Dutchman. So, I mean, how about this, right? Toto is making it absolutely crystal clear that he wanted to get Max this year, and he was considering, and apparently there was a rumour that the Mercedes board had authorised the $100 million or whatever it was going to take to buy Max out of his contract this time out. That never happened. Maybe monetarily didn't make sense to Mercedes to pay all that money to, you know, upgrade their lineup, but upgrade it by how much is, I suppose, a question. And then Red Bull, Max probably wanted to stay because who knows who's going to be the best team next year anyway. There's some other factors, right? But now Toto is saying absolutely clear that, look, if we're the best team, Max will want to join us, and I won't have to pay much to buy him out of his contract because his contract is going to be slightly different next year. So I'll maybe pay him 10 million or pay Red Bull 10 million rather than 100 million like it would have been. But he's not denying at all that he will do this, right? Like, he's saying, well, I might have done that this year, but next year I'll only have to pay 10% of that. Implying that, like, he is going to do it, right? Like, if they are the best team, Toto will go and sign Max. I mean, he's talking about conversations with his manager and telling his manager, they're like, yeah, okay, next year you're not going to get the same money you would have got this year, so good luck with that, but you'll still get the money, right? That's the read between the lines. So he's not even trying to hide the situation and what the intentions are. Look, Mercedes might not be the best team next year. They might be Aston Martin, might be Ferrari, I don't know, might be McLaren again, right? It could be anyone. Probably not Red Bull, but who knows, right? So, yeah, Toto's making his position pretty clear and also putting some pressure on George because Toto said there's no negotiations anymore. We are going to get to a new deal with George, but in Toto's eyes, that probably should be a 1+1 and see what happens next time out rather than give him a longer term deal. So that's the big update on the Toto thing of the day. I just thought I've very rarely seen him be this explicit, right? Like, yeah, we know that he wants to sign Max, sure, but under what circumstances? And Toto's like, yeah, well, absolutely, we're going to do this when the time comes. So very much interested in your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.